Pleasure to have you on. This week's weekly webinar, stablecoin webinar, is a bit different. We're actually bringing on Max, who's our head of product and head of stablecoins here at Range, to talk about our recently released report on dollar supremacy and the distribution and location of 5 major stablecoins. So actually, if you want to give a quick intro on yourself, Max, we can go from there.
Yeah, so always interesting to be on a podcast with someone you know directly. But yeah, so I'm Max. I'm the head of product at Range, and I guess Paula, obviously, you know what Range does, but given the webinar format, maybe I'll just briefly give an overview. So at Range, we like to say with Treasury and Risk OS for stable coins and real world assets. And what does that mean in reality? That means actually we have a lot of underlying data. So we're indexing all major chains, all major tokens. And that really allows us to be able to have insights that other people can't do. So that's how we can then write reports like this, because we're collecting all the data. And in our day-to-day job, we're providing that for risk insights or helping clients understand what's going on with their portfolio, a whole lot of things which we won't go into now. But we have all the data for the stable coins, so we're the best people to understand where they are.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Max. And just to add on to that, I'm Paula Pettit, so I'm the VP of Strategy and Growth here. And just to add on to what Max said, we do that and we work with teams like Circle, Stellar, and the Solana Foundation to monitor their assets across chains, assess transaction risks in real time, and enforce treasury policies before funds move. So as Max said, that is the reason we have so much of this data. But yes, if your team is building financial infrastructure on crypto rails and wants to operate with these controls, definitely reach out to us. But yeah, without further ado, we had to fit that in. Would love to talk further about the report that you did. I guess if you want to start kind of in your own words, kind of give a little bit of an introduction on the report for maybe people who haven't read it yet.
Yeah, so the premise is very simple, right? 5 of the biggest, or maybe they're not the biggest, obviously USDC, USDT, they are definitely the biggest, but the other 3 maybe have some deltas to those to the big 2, let's say. Look at where they are, right? Look at the 2 most important chains. So we looked at Solana and Ethereum, and take a point in time and just say, where are these coins, right? Because like we say in the reports, like you go on LinkedIn, you go on X, even now you go on Bloomberg, BBC, wherever, right? Stablecoins, stablecoins, stablecoins. But like actually, where the hell are they is a question that's not actually that easy to answer. So we really sought to do that. And everybody everybody listening to this podcast probably understands public blockchains. You can steal the data. But so okay, great, you can see all the balances, you can see what's issued, but it takes that next level to then understand, okay, but that address, who does that belong to? And that's where, kind of like I said in the real soft open, that's where Range's expertise can be, because we can say, oh, this is a centralized exchange. Oh, this is potentially even a hacker, or oh, this is Aave. Okay, some of those things are easier, and really make a mapping of where all the stablecoins are and just see where the cards land. And we definitely saw that.
Okay, yeah, exactly. And I guess seeing where the cards land, what were some of the most interesting insights that you felt that were most interesting to you, kind of as you were pulling some of this data and running into this?
Yeah, so actually I wasn't quite sure what to expect when we started to do this. We made a conscious decision to focus on Ethereum and Solana. That's because, like, internally that's where we have the best coverage, and because I think Tron, for example, which has another Tron, which has another 30% of stablecoin supply, there's just too much to look at, and is not where Range itself has the most attributions. Like, we do work on Tron, but like simply Ethereum and Solana is really where we're focusing most of our time. And that's a big enough problem. So we focused the scope there, and then we said, okay, USDC, USDT, we clearly couldn't leave those out. Like it would not be like a relevant report if we hadn't included those. But then I think the really interesting thing for me was then to choose the other three to make those decisions. So we had USDG, which we chose because it had like, unlike the others, it had like, and this is where, you know, we start to then we say things and then not necessarily true, but like kind of USDG actually has much more of a Solana first deployment. So that was like an easy, along with PayPal USD, it seemed relevant. But then the fifth choice of the USDe, the Athena choice, is like a very different structure of stablecoin, right? The collateral backing it is not just T-bills or, well, in the case of Tether, maybe it has some more interesting collateral backing it, but like, you know, Athena, what is it? It's, you know, it's a perp delta neutral hedge, you know, giving the peg to a dollar. So it's like a completely different thing. And so for me, it was quite interesting to like start to look how are those being used differently. And like, frankly, they're just completely different use cases. So yeah, to give the very short answer is we took 5 different tokens. They're all like notionally quite similar. People think of them quite similarly, but actually when you look at the data, they are quite different.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like you know, these 5 different stable coins, you know, they have the same peg of the dollar, and as you mentioned, you know, people think of them quite similarly, but in the end, you kind of like all 5 do different actions, right? Different products such as exchange settlement or lending subsidies. Do you think these a- these issuers would agree with kind of you know, their token being solely used for that, or do you expect them to kind of expand?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think clearly Athena would agree, like their token is quite different, and its like ability to grow is quite
Hmm.
different because obviously Athena, you deposit your crypto collateral, like you know, just putting it very simply, and they're going to then grow the supply, which obviously what like there's an element there that like you know if demand for USDE grows and more integrations, obviously people are going to deposit there. But on some level, it's not the same as like Circle, where like all of a sudden a corporate could come and decide deposit 100 million, and there'd be 100 million or more USDC minted immediately. Um, I think so. Like, if we just put USDE aside, which we can definitely say is a DeFi focused product, although you know a very interesting one. The other four, I think, in my gut, I would think they probably like to think they're competing against each other quite directly, but
Hmm.
that's clearly not the case. Like USDT clearly is very focused on crypto trading, right, and perp
Hmm.
being used in perps on centralized exchanges, as is USDC, but like you know the other two, PYUSD and USDG, they're actually not. You know, obviously they're not the denominator. They're not the quote currency for perp. A lot of perp dexes or in centralized exchanges. It's just not. So they have quite different profiles. Sorry, and yeah, that like I think in the report we spell that out quite a lot that they have more like as a percentage, obviously all these things are relative, as a percentage many more um, sort of business use cases, that's uh, in a relative sense than the
Hmm.
others. But
Makes
you
sense.
know that's where then you see like you know having like there's wallets with you know hundreds of millions of dollars just holding them on centralized exchanges for the other two, so that's a thing, right?
Yeah, and speaking of actually, so you know, I think one of the findings was that Binance holds roughly $46 billion in stablecoins across USDT, USDC, and USDe, which is obviously quite substantial and more than combined supplies of certain other stablecoins. You know, for an institutional investor, well, actually, before I ask that, do you think that is kind of a temporary feature of a newer, immature market, or do you expect that this is likely how things might stay? Kind of this
Well,
concentration.
yeah, I mean, I think we'll all agree crypto trading's not going anywhere. And clearly the first use case for stablecoin, or not clearly, the first use case for stablecoins was, Bitfinex. We can argue that a bit, but perp trading. That was the OG use case, and it continues to be. Actually, that was one thing I'd had in mind to mention is, we also at the beginning of the year we did a report on Euro stablecoins, and there's this huge difference where okay, the dollar is the denominator for most assets, right? Whether it's oil, being very current, or crypto assets, everyone thinks about them in dollar, denominated in dollars. With the euro stablecoins, which have far less issuance, actually that difference is, that go to market is almost reinforced, because without that crypto trading use case initially, we see they're really having to focus on different use cases, whether that be corporate trade finance use cases and proper payments. So the smaller dollar tokens that are not used so much for crypto trading, they also have a similar profile where they're much more thinking about other use cases, real use cases, you could say, in sort of in inverted commas. So yeah, I think just to go back to your question there, clearly we both, or I believe there will be more use cases for stablecoins. Stablecoin issuance is going to grow. I think that's a secular trend we all agree with. Will crypto trading, perp trading, grow with that? I don't think it will grow as much as stablecoin issuance. So I think as a percentage that will not be will decrease over time. Centralized exchanges will likely still be a key on off ramp if they can remain competitive in that. And we saw Kraken recently got their a Fed account, right? The Fed master account, I believe. So that means they have access now to the US's core payment infrastructure. So clearly they're moving in that space and probably will remain competitive. But I think likely we'll see the amount held as a percentage reduce over time.
Yeah, I think that naturally makes sense, for sure. And I guess, with all the findings you found in the report, was there, and it covers distribution and location, was there anything that you think would be useful for anybody who is either managing a stablecoin or launching one or custodying? Is there any interesting insights that they should take into account that maybe hadn't surfaced before?
Yeah, so I think the report for, it's just a snapshot in time, but actually range, we have all this data and more in real time. So I think for an issuer, you really want to know okay, where is my token? Who has my token? And then, there's other insights, for example, if you're deployed in the lending market, there might be, who are my borrowers? Who are my lenders? Are there any liquidations happening? Because sudden liquidations might require someone to get liquidity, and can really affect your operations, your daily operations of your stablecoin. And especially when you might be in the bootstrapping phase, that might be something you really want to keep an eye on. And also, that data would be very useful in understanding how are your competitors, going to market, right? And where do you need to be, or maybe in which playgrounds shouldn't you play because they're already saturated, and they're all key decisions. So I think as an issuer, having that real-time insight is really valuable, and that's not just for stablecoins. I think stablecoins is clearly the word of the day, or the word of at least 2025, right? And
Yes,
it seems like it's continuing.
2026 too.
Yeah.
That's the year we're in.
I think, yeah, for real world asset issuers, actually they probably have more of an incentive, because they have more complex underlying collateral. So liquidity crunches, then potentially the need for there to be sudden redemptions might affect their operations more directly. With the stablecoin, if for some reason there was a massive redemption due to, I don't know, a centralized exchange failed, right? And suddenly there were massive redemptions, you could see, that could really squeeze the whole treasury market. And like if we go to sort of more exotic and like not even that much more exotic underlying collateral than treasury bills, T-bills, like liquidity squeezes could have a much more profound effect. So understanding where the on-chain liquidity is going, what likely, if redemptions are going to be coming in real time, I think is going to be very useful and very, very insightful for any issuer of almost any asset, which is like, quite hard for me to say. Then one, oh yeah, you go.
No, I said it. I definitely agree, and that's I think something that we were seeing a lot of. These teams don't necessarily have that real time or kind of in depth. So I fully agree. But carry on.
Yeah, and then so like obviously if you're an issuer, you have some of an incentive to build this yourself, but actually like take it from range. It's a real job as well to pull those indexes, and especially having that in real time and feeding that into your workflows. That's where I think we can really bring an advantage to teams, that they can have actionable insights, not just like,
Hmm.
okay, we made some dashboards, right? Now what? It's like, okay, we have data feeds and they're telling us things, they're
Hmm.
making us take decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of, and before things happen, and as they happen, not just after. Yeah, and then I think kind of on that. So as we covered, kind of range does the real time, and then the report is a snapshot. I am curious. I feel like most people always talk about where stablecoins and digital assets are moving, where are the the volumes, and where are trades happening daily. But we chose a kind of a snapshot moment. What do you feel gets sharper when you look at the data that way? And what do you feel maybe gets lost? That's interesting to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you take a snapshot, that's not, the next block, everything was different, right? And the block before, everything was different. Like when we went through iterations of the report, the data could change quite meaningfully. And it's those changes which I think are where the key insights lie, really, and like in the real-time aspect of changes in liquidity, changes in whatever velocity of tokens, concentration of tokens. In the block we indexed, there could have been no sanctioned holders, but like and the next block there could have been, and then they could be out again. So in the changing and the movement of a gunfight, that is really where the insight is.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, but it just allows us to kind of get deeper insight on that specific and where everything is held. And I guess speaking of that, I think you saw there was a couple different um, data points that came out from the different stable coins, such as, PYUSD is, PayPal's stable coin, and it has the largest distribution network, and it's, living on a couple different exchanges. But then, USDe, 60% is sitting in a single staking contract with almost none of it on sexes. I guess what do you take from that, and how does that affect how issuers should maybe think about distribution?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess
Loaded
USDE.
question, sorry.
Yeah, well, no.
Yes.
USDE is, it's simply like, as we sort of already mentioned, like because it's so different, it's very
Mhm.
interesting because it's like I said, its collateralization is so different to PayPal USD or whatever, USDT even, right? So you see a limitation there as well because it's come from Ethereum. Actually, like I think it's pretty much like 99%, 99% of it
Mhm.
is still on Ethereum, right? So that's like so what's the like if I'm an issuer of just a normal stablecoin, I can say like, okay, right, clearly where I choose to deploy and collateralize my stablecoin matters. Like so,
Mhm.
and if I'm USDE, I'm like, okay, how could I move to Solana? Like clearly, the Solana community, they're they could, like, there's no reason, like, there is even some USDe on Solana, but like it hasn't taken up. And like, so why might that be? Well, clearly still there is some, maybe not ideological differences, but like, clearly people who build on Solana, they're interested on Solana on some level on the more DeFi side, and people who build on Ethereum are still more thinking of to use stuff on EVM, and maybe that's something there. Like maybe there's USD Sol, right? That could have the exact
Hmm.
same construction as USDC, but be deployed on Solana. It'd be interesting to see if someone tries that. Probably there's not so much space. Then, yeah, one other thing I sort of meant to mention earlier is like there's also interesting things that we left out, right? Like we took 5 stablecoins, but there's also this like DAI, right? DAI would have also been an interesting
Hmm.
stablecoin because, yeah, like okay, where I don't have the number to hand, but like a
Is
huge
it?
chunk of USDC is just sat in DAI, right? So,
Hmm.
I
It's
and
four
like I
four
don't know,
point two billion. 4.2 billion.
yeah, okay, thank God someone's looking at the numbers. Like I think Paula, like you and I both, we were both DevCon 3, so we've been in the space for some time.
That's Prague,
Like,
right? Yes, we have.
yeah, make a DAO, like at that time, like it just felt like a completely different product to what DAI is now. So it's just
Hmm.
very, very interesting. Just like, okay, right. It just all went into that. USDC, it all went into DAI. So I don't know quite what to say
Yeah.
there. Let people make their own opinions.
I am curious. Yeah, it is totally different. Yeah, I do remember when DAI was like the stable coin back in the day. It was the first one kind of to my knowledge like that. That was big. But I guess yeah, to this point of 4.2 billion being on yeah, the USDC position, does that kind of make do you feel like that makes DAI a wrapped USDC at this point? Or is that just you know what? Any commentary
Ready
on that or
to
that's
sink
fine.
my career on that hill.
You know what? As I asked it, I was like, we will leave that there. But we can switch to kind of some of the attributions because I think there was a lot of different attributions that came from the report there, from the different data that Range can pull out. I think one of the things that you saw was that in certain areas, OKX has wallets holding exactly $500 million. Is there any thoughts on like those exact round number fingerprints, and does that help unlock attribution at scale in any way?
Yeah, I mean that like yeah, so that's like starts to become quite technical of like how do we do attributions? Obviously some attributions are very easy to do, some are harder, some are even harder, right? Like for example, the clusters like Coinbase and OKX, they both have like wallets that you can sort of think of theirs. You can look at who they've interacted with, who they're funded with, and then we can say, okay, that is Coinbase for a variety of reasons, which will go out of scope. And like
Mhm.
being able to make those positive attributions is like it's not always that simple. And those cases are very easy. It's like you can see very round numbers, and we even see this like SocGen, for example, also have very round numbered wallets which just hold their assets. But yeah, like then that's where like this whole game and this whole data pipelines, especially for someone who wants to use this kind of thing, like that's where our expertise is important because it's not directly obvious that that necessarily is that entity, but you can infer it with a high degree of confidence. That like goes times 11 when we start looking at like malicious addresses. And so, for example, there we might look at like transaction behaviors and like try and understand those. Like, for example, phishing scams and pulling out, looking at code and similar code that's held by those accounts and being able to identify like transaction patterns that could be to do with, like I said, phishing, smurfing, all these different things. That's like really where Range's expertise in attribution and analyzing the behaviors of wallets provides an edge.
Perfect. Yeah. That makes sense. And then I think pulling it back actually to another report that we did, as you mentioned earlier in Q1, we released our Euro, or actually end of Q4, we released our Euro stablecoin report where we discussed several Euro stablecoins and what they were doing. Obviously, MiCA has been live and it's reshaped the market quite a bit. Since you kind of were so involved in both of them, do you feel like now, when the Genius Act passes, do you feel like that will reshape the market in a similar way? Or, yeah, do you have any expectations of what that might do? Or,
Yeah, I think from Micah, much to my surprise, like actually my personal surprise, that well, maybe it's not that surprising when you think about it, but there is a real, if we look at Euro stablecoin issuance, there's like a huge difference between pre and post MiCA. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So okay, so like why is that? Because okay, actually now, especially for for dollar stablecoins, crypto trading is the primary use case to
Hmm.
this day. Regulation, maybe not as interesting. But as we move to real use cases, which I think we all agree, from remittances, payments, RWAs, DVP, PVP, all these kind of things, and having regulatory clarity, if I can say it, is important. I think, yeah, like definitely Clarity Act and these things are gonna have another market step up in adoption for dollar stablecoins, euro stablecoins alike. I think institutions, they don't like rules. They don't not like rules. They like certainty, and like having that certainty, I think clearly will lead to more adoption.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Because yeah, that's what we found. So much changed after MiCA, and it's kind of like, it was the U.S. Stablecoins already too entrenched, but I think it's a little bit of both. We're going to definitely see some shifts, but also it is
yeah,
quite
and I
true.
mean,
Yeah.
I think like then just to say one mildly interesting thing about that is like actually if there's no like people in each jurisdiction, like it's not like Europeans, people in Africa and LATAM, it's not like they're not using stablecoins, right? They want
Yeah.
to use stablecoins. So it's like almost it's like it's neglect of their regulator to not allow them to at least choose to transact in the currency of their jurisdiction. They may not choose to do so for a variety of reasons, but I think it is incumbent upon issuers of assets to allow their citizens like to use those assets to transact. And like blockchains, they're just marketplaces.
Hmm.
They're no different to any other marketplace. Okay, the assets can be different, but they are just a marketplace, and we should be able to transact in the currency of our choice on those marketplaces.
Agree. Definitely agree. Um, yeah. And I guess, you know, this was a snapshot from last month. I'd be curious, if we were to run a report again in 6 months, at a macro scale, we don't have to name names if you don't want, but at a macro scale, what do you anticipate might be some differences we might see from now to 6 months?
Yeah, so maybe one thing I think we didn't touch upon in just conversationally, but in the report is like yeah, the sex DeFi and like multi-sig adoption. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think there'll be much higher levels of adoption, people using multi-sigs. There are things like I say, we were at DevCon many moons ago, right? When Gnosis Wallet was just starting, right? So for us it's kind of obvious, but like actually we've been at like ECC, I was in Frankfurt at like a much more TradFi conference. People are like, yeah, okay, and multi-sigs, NPC, like all those ideas, like people are not just going to be MetaMasking it anymore.
Hmm.
Institutions have not been
Oh yeah.
for the longest time, but I think that adoption is going to increase, and the sort of the sex DeFi split is gonna drop as well. Probably like one thing we didn't include as a data point in this report, but like one thing we do publish to some of our clients, like velocity and like the
Hmm.
percentage of payments that are payments or the
Mm-hmm.
percentage of transactions that are payments. I think like at the moment it's maybe less than 3%. I believe, like I read something, in total stablecoins. That's going to increase. I think once we start getting like that's a real hockey stick. Uh, I think that has hockey stick growth in so much that like you know every micro percent of stablecoins that are used for payments is gonna grow exponentially afterwards. So like it's the more people who are accepting, the more people who will pay, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Agree. I think we'll see how that evolves, and it's kind of chicken and egg, but I think it's hatchy. But and then I guess because we're running out of time, I do want to make sure, are there any kind of interesting insights or takeaways that we didn't cover that you think would be relevant to people listening in?
Um, yeah, I think people should definitely go and look at some of the top holders. I think it's USDG has quite a lot of funds locked in some interesting meme token market. So, like for me, actually, yeah, one really interesting thing is like how many funds are in like providing liquidity in meme coin pools. Like it's genuinely impressive.
Okay.
Um,
We're evolving, but not
like,
that much.
well, people are gonna people.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's certainly interesting, and yeah, I think also the concentration and the overlapping holders is also something to have a look at. But yeah, I think everyone should read the report and ask for more data. And yeah, hopefully or not hopefully, there will be more reports of similar and differing topics coming in the future. So yeah, excited.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for joining, Max. And yeah, thank you so much for being such a integral part of the report. I think it brought out some really interesting findings. And for people who are listening in, if yeah, as Max said, you can even let us know if there's certain findings that you find more interesting, or that you have questions on, because we're in it. So we might be able to answer on that, or get inspiration for future reports. So definitely get in contact for that, or if you need any of the features that we mentioned that we help with. But awesome, thank you so much, and look forward, yeah, look forward to chatting soon. Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.